The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. I hope people can hear me who are on. Welcome to the Best Practice Group webinar about cloud contracts this afternoon. I'm Peter Carter from Best Practice Group, and also from Best Practice Group is Steve James. If anybody can't hear anything, please do just feel free to make a note, ask a question, put your hand up. And we had a bit of a technical problem earlier on today when we started doing our seminar. So please just let us know if there is an issue. Let's crack on. I think there may be one or two more people may join us shortly, but we'll crack on for those who are online at now. Today's webinar is entitled Cloud Contracts. Are they worth the paper they're written on? Or indeed, maybe even, if I can just get this working. Not written on, there we go. Happy days. We get things moving along. Technical problems are a joy, and we love them. Let's go through some of the things we're going to talk about today in today's webinar. First of all, we're just going to cover some of the basics in terms of what are the emerging forms of cloud, so that we're all knowing what we're talking about. I don't intend to labor the point about this, because that's not the purpose of this particular webinar. We're going to look at mainly around the contractual pros and cons around cloud-based services, and look at some of the research that's gone into cloud contracts, and discuss how these differ from the classical software and service contracts, particularly in the way that Best Practice Group proposed to help organizations to get into contracts in a safe, secure, and robust way, both quickly and by saving costs, but also things to do and to consider about procuring from the cloud and how to do that. For those who aren't familiar with us, just a little bit of background about who Best Practice Group are. First of all, we used to be, a number of years ago, be called Contention Management Limited, and our specialism there was really helping organizations who were in dispute with their vendors, either in outsourced service provision or in complex IT procurements, and where they wanted to exit from those situations, and do that in a way that was low risk and completely confidential. And in having done that, and done that for quite a number of years, we also realized that there are ways in which both we could help organizations get into contracts in a safe way, and also reposition and realign projects that as you're getting into them, or when you're in them, then we can realign and get them working in a better way, very often reducing the costs of poor performance, and helping make things a little bit better in terms of fitness for purpose. And doing that around governance process to ensure that the benefits and performances requirements were realized and sustainable. And of course, when we help organizations get into contracts, the whole area of procurement is one that we've become probably more than 35–40% of our work now is doing procurements for organizations, helping you to quantify and understand your expectations, identify partners, and all the due diligence and governance that you need to do around procurements. And it's in doing these procurements that we've come across a number of issues around people who are procuring from the cloud. Some definitions in terms of where we're talking from, and I think a lot of people online today will be very familiar with NIST and the definition of what cloud is. Fundamentally, and I don't intend to read all of everything that's going to put on the screen just now, but the minimal management effort or service provider interaction is one that's quite interesting, and one that I think causes me a little bit of concern. Cloud computing is a model for getting access to technologies quickly, and enabling you to do that in a way that allows you to be flexible in your usage of the resources that you procure. But to do it with a minimal management effort is an interesting definition, especially when you're looking at some of the characteristics of cloud computing. Certainly the characteristics are this rapid elasticity or expansion, and having a measured service. Also, the resource pooling is very useful for many organizations, being able to pull on resources of large IT organizations where generally many organizations couldn't hope to procure that kind of skill set and personnel into their own organizations, has proved of huge benefit to many organizations. And we know that it's as an on-demand service that we can grow and shrink as we move forward. And we do that in a number of different deployment models. So in other words, it may be that it's hybrid. It may actually be a part of all of it. And generally we're more familiar with the whole idea of public cloud, where we have information that may be held on Google or on whatever, and it's just out there. We're just storing our information and we're doing things, Dropbox and so on. But there's a number of private communities coming together, private organizations saying, actually, we want to have all the benefits of this on-demand service, but we want to do it in a private way, or we want to do it in a community way. And of course, the G Cloud is a very large example of community cloud. I was at a seminar recently where the Isle of Man government were talking, and across all public sector organizations on the Isle of Man, they have this overarching community cloud where all these services are available to people to plug into and to utilize. And of course, we can do that in terms of the different parts of the IT resources that we need, both software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And different issues arise across these different ones. And again, today I'm not intending to get into these in any great detail. There are huge benefits of moving into the cloud. Of course, it can be cost effective. It can be easy to scale up and down because you only pay for what you use. And of course, the global reach for business continuity and data recovery is very important. And being able to hook into large resources to be able to do that is quite critical for many companies. But on the downside, there is this total dependency on service providers that is all too prevalent, which may be a good thing for some organizations, but can be a risk. Of course, if we don't have access to the internet, we have no system. And going back to that data issue that I said a moment ago was a benefit, it can actually be a negative as well, because we can get locked in. We can be caught into this situation where it's very difficult to move off one provider and onto another. Data protection might be an issue, and we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail shortly when we look at some of the contract clauses that can hold people up and could end up hanging you and doing you a lot of harm. Where is your information located? What is about security? And actually, who fundamentally owns data? I spoke to an organization recently who were talking about a marketing organization, and all their intellectual property was stored in their images and their videos and all their content. And without realizing it, when they moved all that information into the cloud, their managing director came down and said, you realize we've just given away all our intellectual property. When they looked at the fine clauses in the contract that they'd signed, indeed they had given away the intellectual property that they thought they owned. Many organizations, certainly public sector organizations and finance organizations, health sector organizations, have regulatory issues, and these have to be taken into consideration when moving into any new provider, but certainly when moving information into the cloud. There is a concern from a number of organizations and analysts about lack of governance in the cloud and responsibility gaps in terms of who is responsible for ensuring that you have fitness for purpose in your systems and for putting those things right. Business continuity, level of support, all have to be considered when procuring from any vendor and looking at buying any service, and particularly when you're looking to put a lot of your business systems and your core processes out to the cloud. And whilst we talk about cloud being flexible in terms of the pricing structures, a lot of people are beginning to realize, having been into it for a little while, that there are hidden costs and runaway costs. So what appears to be low cost at the outset because of a lack of capital investment can end up having runaway costs with additional modules and additional services needed to be bought. And that £10 a month system that you thought was great to begin with is no longer running at those prices at all. And so we have, let the buyer beware. It may well be back in town. We have to be very, very careful. And should the buyer be always wary of what's going on, or should there be a responsibility on the vendor to support what you're doing? Some of the challenges that we're up against just generally are around the fact that some of the stuff we're looking at is right at the leading edge of the information technology field, and we might not even be aware of it. There's potentially a lack of common standards. I worked for an organization not long ago who said the wonderful thing about standards is there's so many to choose from. But if you're looking for flexibility into the years to come in terms of how you move your data, if you've got a strategic direction of growth and the organizations that you contract with aren't going to move with you, then how do you move if there are a lack of common standards and interoperability is not assured? And of course, I mentioned a moment ago about hybrid cloud. There are layers and layers of cloud providers, and it may seem inexpensive, but is it robust and secure? And actually, who are you really contracting with, and who really owns the data that you're signing up to? And doing business with a cloud provider basically is a whole new ball game. The way in which we procure changes over time. And this whole tendency towards click-to-contract is very different in terms of how people are buying. Some research that I mentioned that I'd look into in more detail was, I'm just going to touch on the Cloud Legal project undertaken by the Queen Mary University of London. And they looked at about 31 sets of cloud providers and the standard terms that were held within them. The first one they looked at was, of course, the CIA triad, looking at confidentiality, integrity, and availability of customers' data. The importance of this is that data should not be released to third parties, either in error or intentionally, by somebody else, and it's certainly of your core data. Data integrity is important because you don't want anything to be lost or corrupted. And of course, availability, you want to make sure that information is available to you, possibly 24/7, 365 days of the year, but certainly when it's required. What the study found when they looked at the contracts is that in many contracts, the responsibility for the confidentiality and integrity was expressly placed on you, the customer. So despite the fact that you're putting your information onto their systems and they're hosting it, and it's all up there and it's not really available to you because it's cloud, the responsibility for that information and for maintaining that information was on you, the customer. Location of data. Some people don't really mind where their data is held, but for a number of organizations, certainly public sector bodies, and as I mentioned before, organizations that have regulatory issues, then where customer information is held is going to be very important, especially for data protection legislation. And what the study found was that many cloud contracts did not specify any restrictions on data location. And when this was an option, it wasn't actually held under warranty in terms of where it would be. Limitation of liability is important because if your service provider is negligent with your information or fails to provide the service, what compensatory arrangements are in place? Well, the study found that none of the contracts reviewed in the study offered a refund or charges as a remedy, and the best compensations on offer were either the service credits or 1 month's charges. I'm certainly aware, when I'm working from my home, about the way in which your terms of contractual terms can change without you really being aware of it. Broadband vendors do this all the time. And if you can't rely as a business on your contractual terms to be consistent, and especially if it's only service provider can, and if only the service provider can change them, you're fundamentally going to be at risk. And again, the contracts that were studied in this particular study that was undertaken at the Queen Mary University found that such changes can be offered by a service provider just simply by posting new contract terms to their website. And they're often held to be binding. And if you do have an issue, where do you go to court? Well, again, that may or may not be important to you, but around 50% of the contracts studied were governed by the US law and gave the service provider their home court as the exclusive jurisdiction to hear any disputes. Interestingly enough, I heard that one large cloud provider recently tried to incorporate itself on a satellite, and another large service provider, household name, has got a data center on a ship in international waters. Clearly trying to get out of any jurisdiction and legal issues. Looking at some of the contract terms in more detail, we find that Amazon Web Services, one of the largest of the service providers, says we will have no liability to you for any unauthorized access or use, corruption, deletion, or loss of any of your content or applications. Are you going to sign up to that? ADrive are basically saying here that they will hand over and disclose any information about you and your information to a law enforcement or other government officials as they deem appropriate. Again, your information is there to be held and secure, but actually is it? And here's their get-out clause. They're going to share it with anybody they think is able to have it.
I want to buy a gramophone. What? A gramophone. Gramophone. A gramophone. I don't think we've got any turntable, unless I'm very much mistaken. And what's the difference between that and a gramophone? Well, about 30 years in a plastic cupboard, YouTube. Well, I'd like one of these, please. You sure? Yes, please. All right. That would be good. Right. Well, as you can see, it's got all the speeds. It's got 33 and 45. Yes. What can I do with my old 78s? What do you say? Nothing. Nothing. You said what about my old 78, didn't you? No, I didn't. All right. So you got your deck. Do you want a Dolby with it? Yes, please. Dolby's with tape recorders, cheap, all right? Do you want an amp? No, I won't. You won't hear anything, Grandad, without an amp, I'm afraid. Of course, yes, I want an amp. You want an amp? Yes. All right, what sort of output are you looking for? What sort have you got? No clue. About medium? How many watts exactly? Oh, I should think about 3. No, 2,000. 500. 30. So you know all about it now, do you? You want a 31 amp? A 31 amp. Do you want speakers? Yes. Do you want a rumble filter? Yes. Do you want a bag on your head? Yes. So you got your deck, you got your amp, you got your rumble filter, then of course your bag on your head. Now, do you want woofers and tweeters? No, I don't want. Well, you got to put you one of my notes like that. They're in your speakers. You've been telling us you don't want slimline salad dressing. Yes, I do want slimline salad dressing.
Okay, we digressed a little bit with that one, but it's a little interesting to see that whose responsibility was it to get the technology right there. It didn't certainly seem to be the vendor, and sometimes we're in an area where we're procuring a little bit out of our depth, but it is nice to have a break in the middle of a webinar so I can have a drink. Anyway, when we do a lot of procurements, we certainly talk to people about court rulings and how they affect your procurement as you move forward. And some of these can't help you when you're buying in the cloud. A number of cases which of course are open to interpretation, I'm quite happy to accept that. But some of these cases start talking about its software must be fit for a purpose like any other product and cannot rely on standard terms to deny full redress. But are we procuring? You know, a number of cases talk about actually are we procuring something or are we getting a license? And some of these aren't particularly helpful. We certainly talk about in standard procurements about the clarity of Stevenson-Blake, where the vendor who becomes an expert has to provide and determine what they will provide. And they have to validate what they won't provide or can't provide. And they also have to tell you what the consequential impacts of what they can't provide are going to be. In other words, they start by taking on the role of an expert, and having those responsibilities means that you can rely on them to provide the best advice. And that advice has to carry on through the lifetime of the contract. The problem is, in a cloud environment where I'm determining what's required and I'm making sure that I've understood the technology, then those court cases have no bearing at all. So if we go down some of these items on this page, you'll see in the second column there, it is the provider's responsibility to ensure that you get what you want. So the third line down is the solution of satisfactory quality. If you follow the best practice group procurement methodology, then it is the provider's responsibility to make sure that your systems are fit for purpose. It is the provider's responsibility to ensure that data migration in and out, backup encryption and data protection is there. It is their responsibility to warn you of what is being provided, what is not being provided, and what the consequential impact of that's going to be. It is the provider's responsibility to think about the statutory and regulatory compliance, and so on. But if we're just going to go into the cloud and click to contract, then it is now your responsibility. And interestingly enough, even when you're moving into the G Cloud, and I was at a recent seminar when Denise McDonough, who's the program director for the G Cloud, was talking, she was basically saying that now under the community cloud of the G Cloud, you're able to procure, not in 100 days were her words, but in 10. But in 10 days, who's actually going to ensure that that solution is fit for purpose for you? And that leads me on to just go through a case study example that we've had with one of our clients not so long ago. And if I can just run you through the process very briefly. effectively, at the start of this, the client does a request for proposal, an RFP, for cloud infrastructure and storage services, as it doesn't want to specify to the solution to the markets. Very sensible. In other words, don't tell people how to provide it, just tell people what you want. And that was a very strong thing that they were doing. The client specifies that it would like a scoping process before getting into contracts to de-risk things. Then the market responded. So far the process is going exceedingly well. The client evaluates and selects the preferred bidder on the strength of the RFP response. When the bidder comes to site to define the requirements, and the bidder outputs new requirements document and then starts pushing for the order, pushing to get the contract. At that point, we were called in to do an assurance review to see what was going on, and we found that there was a serious misalign in what was happening. What the buyer had asked for was to be scoped with the processes, the applications, the impact, the resourcing, the skills, availability, and in fact, a complete project plan. And what had actually been scoped was just stuff to de-risk the bidder's position. When the buyer's what the buyer's requirements were versus what the bidder's requirements, perceptions of the requirements were, and the bidder's perceptions of the requirements were woolly and vague. And so what they were coming up with was technical requirements, and in fact had no bearing on what the business needed to help it move forward strategically in a sustainable and an assured way. So the project success factors were utterly misaligned and very different between the parties, and therefore there was no guarantee of success as they were pointing at different targets. The bidder's success was saying, are you ready for service? And the buyer was saying, its success factors was, are we actually ready for business? And actually operating its business on a new platform with all the applications and data migrated, rationalized, and where appropriate, virtualized. The bidder was pushing master planning and the plan ownership back to the buyer. But the buyer had never done this exercise before, so how can it know how to plan and what tasks and resources they were needed? The business impact of this is the provider will have to deliver an infrastructure that it thinks might be fit for purpose. Then it is down to the buyer to own it from there on in. And it's very common in these situations that they end up buying unused and overcapacity. So the whole benefit of cost benefits of being able to be flexible in usage ends up being thrown out of the window. So what do you do about it? Well, clearly what we would say is meet what you need as a strategic partner to help you get into this in a safe way. So where the project was ready for service. Sure, where it needs to be, it's ready for service. But there was no migration. And what we're looking for is effective migration. What the vendor was saying, there were no business benefit to the business, but we want to be ready for business. And therefore business carries on, and business carries the risk, and what we're looking for is business as usual. So clearly a misalign, and this is the whole area where we have a huge amount of concern about people procuring cloud solutions. So we have a different mechanism for procurement, where we contract for the advice separately for contracting for the solution. And of course, as we move through a clearly defined and controlled process, the fitness for purpose outcome is improved and increased all the way through. So yes, we do start out with our vision, strategy, and objectives. We try and align the expectations. And at point of that, we get into this dialogue process where we're trying to make this vendor the expert to offer us of advice. Then we can start understanding actually what we will get, what we won't get, and what those consequential impacts are going to be. And we end up with a measurement against objectives and not functions. Clearly, it's a different way of procuring, and one that gives you safety and a robustness that you may be seeking. So what do you do differently when you're contracting for the cloud? We would say think very hard about the business case. Research your options carefully, and take advice on the contractual implications of what you're signing up to. Objectively contrast the benefits with the risks. And certainly contract separately for the advice from the solution, and do that locally. And of course, be ready for the service delivery. Do not underestimate the size and complexity of the task. It isn't always plug and play. And of course, we'd say don't assume you can do it alone. At the very least, take advice on the approach to the contract. Always elevate the provider to be an expert before going to contract. And of course, today we're just drawing to a close now, but what we do have is a white paper that hopefully you've downloaded and looked at, which has got a lot of this information in more detail. And on our website we have a whole range of other guides talking about court rulings and about the responsibilities of expert vendors. But I don't know if anybody does have any questions. If they do, please mark them up now. Steve's picking anything up. The kind of things that we end up talking about around now is all this about expert vendors and what our approach would be to help you move forward. So how do we help you establish where you're at? Well, fundamentally, you may be at one of the 3 different stages I talked about. I often give an analogy of marriage. You know, you may be getting into it, you may be wanting it fixed, or you may be looking to get a divorce. But wherever you are in the life cycle with a cloud provider, are they providing you fit-for-purpose solutions? And if they're not, and it's misaligned, and you feel as if you're throwing money and you're getting change notices and extra modules that aren't right, then that's the area where we can come in. And we've done over 500 project recovery pieces of work for organizations, both in the public and the private sector, to help realign expectations, renegotiate contractual terms, and get people with services that are fit for purpose. And what we try and say is, and it might sound trite, is we try and make your vendor into a trusted partner that you always wanted them to be. And that's the area where we've got a lot of skills. It may be that things have gone too far and you do need to exit. And as expert witnesses, we'll come in and provide that level of support too. But if you're just getting out and thinking about going into the cloud, and if that's an area that you're looking at, then we have this procurement framework that allows you to get into it in a safe way, making sure that you've got your requirements properly defined and can move forward in that kind of format. If anybody does have any questions, then please let us know. We'll probably be in touch with a few of you in the next few days anyway by email to see if there is anything. But please do download the white paper. If there's any questions, anything, please, we're very open to take phone calls, take emails. Please get back in touch with us. But if that's all there is for today, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And we'll certainly be letting you know when we've got our next series of webinars coming up. Thank you and good afternoon.